I found. This is the Olympus Stylus Zoom, and this was actually the last film camera I ever owned. Well, I say owned, but it really belonged to my parents, and then I acquired it at some point from a school trip. But yeah, it's been with me ever since. Now, probably prior to this, I probably owned something kind of like this, the Kodak Star, but other than that, I never really got into film. And that's because it wasn't until 2012 that I finally got into photography, and by then, of course, everything was digital. Now, I know in recent years, film has seen quite the comeback, but between the cost of a camera, film, and processing fees, it's just not something I want to spend my money on. But what if you could get a similar look in your digital photos without that ongoing cost? So today I want to take a look at a film simulation plugin called Dehancer. Now, full disclosure, Dehancer did send me a free copy of the plugin to review, but they asked for my honest opinion, and they're not going to see this until it's published. So you're going to get my genuine opinion on this. Now, they've also provided a discount for my viewers, so if you like what you see, you can head over to dehancer.com for a free trial, and if you decide to purchase, use promo code Snyder for 10% off your purchase, which will help support the channel. Now, with that out of the way, let's get into it. So why might you be interested in something like this? Well, aside from the price tag, there is just something about film that's easy to love. Yes, there is that more hands-on, slower pace that shooting on something like an SLR can bring, but there's no denying there's just something special about the look of a photo shot on a roll of film, and that's something that can be difficult to replicate in the digital darkroom. But that's where Dehancer comes in. Now, this isn't going to be a comprehensive guide as to how Dehancer works. I'm just going to give you an overview, show you how I use it, what I like, and what I think could be improved. So Dehancer works with Lightroom, Photoshop, Capture One, and Affinity Photo, and it's available on both Mac and PC. So first, what are you getting with Dehancer? Well, included with the plugin are 63 film stocks, 5 print options, plus Dehancer has provided some presets and you can save your own. Now, before we get into the plugin, we first need to make sure our image is ready to go. Dehancer does provide some recommendations, but I found it's best to treat them as you would any other preset in Lightroom, as a starting point. Now, more than anything, it's important to understand why Dehancer has made these suggestions. So we're lowering the exposure and contrast, we're increasing the blacks, and making sure we don't have any digital sharpening applied. Essentially, the goal is to start with a flat image that gives Dehancer as much information to work with. Now, I agree with some of this, primarily the contrast and blacks. Exposure will be quite dependent on your photo, but I've also found it handy to sometimes lower the highlights or whites, again, just trying to create a flat image. I've also found I prefer to keep the sharpening at Lightroom's default of 40 rather than lowering it to 0. One thing that caught my attention though was this, noise reduction of 0. Now, if the goal is to simulate film, including film grain, wouldn't it make more sense to start off with a clean image? I mean, adding grain on top of digital noise would seemingly just amplify the noise. Now first, before I get any further, let's open up an actual image here so we can actually start to see this in action. So this first image that we're gonna be working on here with, I actually shot this, let's see, almost 11 years ago. And I shot this on my Nikon D200, and for some reason, the built-in camera profile with modern Lightroom, it just hardly ever looks that good. So first things first, I'm going to enable Adobe Standard as Dehancer recommends. Already that's making a world of difference. All right, so following Dehancer's recommendations, we'll go ahead and lower the contrast by -40. We'll increase the blacks by +60. And then, like I said, I'm gonna keep the sharpening here at 40. I'm just actually gonna keep everything at default except the masking because I do want to avoid as much digital sharpening as possible. I'm gonna go ahead and mask out what I don't want sharpened. So that's gonna include primarily the water in this case. Looking good so far, but I'd also recommend setting your white balance while it's still in a raw format. And I'm just gonna click auto. Generally that does a pretty good job, and in this case it did. Now, like I did mention though, a lot of the times I have found I still wanna make some additional changes. One thing that I typically would have done as the first thing when I open up a photo is I'm gonna enable the profile corrections. That of course is camera dependent. And then I'm still seeing that this waterfall right here in the front is still quite bright. So I'm just gonna go ahead and take my highlights all the way down, still a little bright. So I'm gonna take the whites kind of down, and I just wanna retain, actually we're gonna take it all the way down. I just wanna retain as much information right in these highlights here because I wanna let Dehancer take care of providing the contrast and color there. And I think in this particular case, we'll lower the exposure just a touch, but for the most part, I think we're gonna keep this right where it is. Okay, so once done, you can open it up in Dehancer, but I actually prefer to first send it to Photoshop. Now, Why is this? Well, one of the best features of Lightroom is its non-destructive workflow. Once you edit this in Dehancer and save though, you no longer have the ability to change any of the settings. Now with Photoshop, we have Smart Objects. With Smart Objects, we actually retain the ability to make changes afterward. So instead of opening in Dehancer, let's go ahead and choose Open as Smart Object in Photoshop. Now, before we open up the Dehancer plugin, it's important to note, as of this recording, Dehancer only works in the sRGB color space. Now I have made the mistake of opening this in ProPhoto RGB, and I can confirm the colors were off when I saved the image. Now, if you're opening this straight from Lightroom, you'll be given this window where you'll just choose sRGB from the dropdown. If you're doing this in Photoshop, however, just go up to Edit, Convert to Profile, and then you're gonna choose sRGB. Now, with that out of the way, let's finally get into Dehancer. Just like any other filter in Photoshop, we'll go to Filter, Dehancer, and then Dehancer Film. Just takes a quick moment for that to open. Let me bring this over to my main screen and make that full screen. Now on the left, you're gonna see your film stocks and presets. Up top, you have access to a histogram and the zoom, and on the right are your settings. Now, not only did Dehancer sample all 63 film stocks, but because film reacts differently when exposed normally, underexposed, and overexposed, each of the 63 is made of 3 samples, which can be controlled with the push and pull slider. So for this first one, I am going to actually go ahead and choose Velvia 50. There we go, Fujichrome Velvia 50. Now, the first thing Dehancer recommends doing is using the expand to set your black and white points. I have 2 issues when it comes to this approach. First, setting your black and white point is a good idea, but in my opinion, setting your exposure should be your first priority. If you set your white point, but then decide your overall exposure is off, well, now that white point is gonna be off. Second, if expand should be done so early in the process, why is it the 4th module down? Let's put it right up to the top if we want to use it first. Now in this case here, I actually do want to increase the exposure just a touch, something like that. Now let's make some adjustments to the black point. It is looking a little flat. We're going to lower this black point here a little bit, and that is because I am going to be playing around with contrast here in a moment as well. I do want to bring up the whites a bit. Something like that. Actually, yeah, that's looking pretty good. Next, we're going to go to Film Developer, where we can make some adjustments to the contrast, the gamma, which is going to push the midtones either more towards the shadow or more towards the highlights. And we're going to boost up the contrast quite a bit here. Now, as you might have guessed, I already do have some settings in mind that I want to set this to, because again, I don't want to make you sit here and watch me experiment with a photo. Gamma correction, we're going to boost those midtones more towards the highlights. Just a touch. That was actually a little heavy-handed there. Let's lower it down, somewhere around there. And then we're going to boost up the colors as well. Okay. Now, one thing that you might notice here is the highlights in this bottom waterfall. Still looking a little bright. Fortunately, we do have film compression. What film compression is going to do is it's going to help replicate just the innate quality of film, where you have a lot more room in your highlights than you do with a digital image. So we just enable that, and right off the bat, you can see how that really brought down the highlights in that white quite a bit. I'm going to boost that up just a little more. Again, just retaining that little last bit of that highlight there. Now, because Velvia 50 is a slide film or a color positive film, what they recommend setting this to is linear. So we set to linear, so that way essentially we're not putting it on paper itself. I do want to bring down the exposure just a touch. We're going to also play with the contrast a little more, and the color density. This is the primary reason I wanted to apply the print, is because this doesn't necessarily more so saturate it, it just makes the colors more dense. So we're going to bring that up quite a bit there. And then we can just check this on and off, and you can see the difference that's making in the image. Actually, to be fair, I don't know if I really want to lower the color too much. All right. And then of course, what we always want to make sure that we add on to an image here, and I say always, typically that's one of the reasons that you're going to, you're looking for that film emulation, is because we want a little bit of grain in our photo. So we'll go ahead and apply the grain, and let's go ahead and zoom in 1:1. I want you to see what is actually happening here with the grain. All right. So this was off and this is on. If you know Velvia, you'll notice something seems a little bit off with the film grain, right? Because Velvia is known for its fine grain, but that's not what we're seeing here. Now, you can of course tweak it, sure, but here's a heads up about film grain. No matter which film type is selected, it's gonna default to negative. But again, remember, Velvia is a color positive film. So if we just change the film type from negative to positive, well, there we go. that grain really got tightened up there. You can still see it, but it is a lot smaller now. A couple more settings we're gonna go with here. Bloom is another one. This is just gonna give the image a little bit more of a glow, which I love doing, especially with waterfalls, but a lot of landscapes in general. All right, we click that and there you go. It just gave that little extra glow to the water. And then we're gonna add just a little bit of a vignette. So let's see, let's darken that just a little bit more, somewhere around there. And then the feather, I actually want to take the feather down just a little bit because I want to make sure it's not getting too far into the image itself. But there we have it. That's our first image. So let's go ahead and click OK. Let's go to another image. Now this time, I think we're going to mix this up and we're going to go with one of Dehancer's presets. So again, I've already made some of the adjustments on this photo just to kind of get it where I want it in Lightroom. So we'll go ahead and again, choose Edit In and Open as Smart Object in Photoshop. I just have the action right down here, Convert sRGB. Click it. We'll go to Filter, Dehancer, Dehancer Film, and we'll open that right back up. Now, once again, I'm gonna go ahead and reset, but this time we're gonna go with presets. But this is just gonna be some interesting combinations of things that you can select. So it's gonna choose a film stock plus some type of print. So in this particular image, I am gonna go with Kodak Actar 25, which is a color negative film with the Kodak Endura paper. All right, now as far as the exposure is concerned, that's looking pretty good. So we'll leave that as is. As Dehancer recommends, we'll go ahead and set our black point and white point. We're gonna go up to Film Developer next, and I'm gonna increase the contrast. So we're gonna bring down the gamma correction. We're gonna push the midtones more towards the shadows in this case. Now, right back here in the middle of the image, this road, I want that to be the focal point, but it's still looking just a tad on the bright side. So I'm gonna enable the film compression again. So if we zoom in now to the middle of this image, before, after, you can see it's really, really subtle, but I do like what it's doing to that center part of the road. Now, one thing I find interesting with some of these presets is that it's not necessarily what you expect to see with a particular film. So in this particular instance, you can see that we have film type selected as positive, although Actar 25 is a color negative film. So let's go ahead and choose negative. And what that's gonna do, as you can see right away, is it's gonna provide us that grain that we're looking for. Because honestly, if I select that as positive, I don't really see a whole lot of grain being added to this image. And I think it's just because there's a mismatch there. So I'm gonna change it to negative, and that in of itself is looking good. That's pretty much it. I love this image exactly how it is. And again, it's just the way that some of these film profiles just boost the colors in certain ways that of course you can do this in Lightroom, you can do this in Photoshop, but it's really hard to emulate the certain qualities of each film, where Dehancer makes it quite easy to do. So what do I like about Dehancer? Well, after editing a few images with the plugin and more while prepping for the video, I found this plugin to be quite capable. I've tried other options, including Lightroom presets from other users, and the problem I have found with those is, well, you're obviously stuck with just the tools Lightroom provides. And let's face it, if you stick with Lightroom controls, you have no means of adding things like halation or bloom. Sure, some of these things can be added in Photoshop, but the tools within Dehancer just make it so much easier. I also like that there's a separate film grain for negative and positive films, and that you have so much control over how it appears in the highlights, midtones, and shadows, as well as being able to control how much detail your image still has, even with the grain. What I really appreciate is how each module in Dehancer is designed to mimic a specific film quality or a part of the development process, allowing you to process a photo digitally as if you were handling actual film. So what do I think could be improved? Well, as a Lightroom user, I really appreciate the convenience of dynamic previews, meaning that as I hover my cursor over a particular preset, I can see how it looks without actually applying it. Now, of course, such a feature would likely take quite the development, but what I think could be an easier alternative would be to give us the option to either resize the sidebar or even just to give us a single column with larger thumbnails. Now, also the zoom options in Dehancer are limited to either fitting to the window or zooming to 100%. Now, this hasn't really been an issue in this video, but that's because I'm simply recording this on my MacBook screen. Typically, I'm working on a 4K monitor, and thanks to how Apple manages scaling on 4K displays, viewing an image at 100% doesn't really provide a true 100% view. Now, typically in Lightroom or Photoshop, I'll just zoom into 200% so I can closely inspect an image. And I think adding that third option for us could be quite useful, as I'm sure there are plenty of Mac users with 4K displays. Now, I appreciate that we are given a histogram to help set our black and white points, but I'd love to see a way of highlighting areas that are being clipped, much like we see in Lightroom or in Photoshop. Next, let's all be honest, many of us never read a manual. But unless you do, it's easy to overlook that some adjustments simply don't work unless you've used another. Let me explain. So for instance, let's look at the film developer. Here you see we have contrast boost, gamma correction, color adjustment, and color boost. Now, unless you've read the manual, it isn't clear that gamma correction and color adjustment won't do anything unless you first do something with that contrast boost. So if we set this back here to 0, notice how the gamma correction changed. And no matter how much I slide this, it doesn't do anything because you have to make a change with it. And I can go either way, it doesn't matter, but you have to make a change in the contrast boost to make those controls work. Now, something I think could be useful in making the plugin a bit more intuitive would be to simply gray out adjustments that can't be used until you make that initial adjustment. And add something that allows a user to see a message of what needs to be done first. Now, I think we've all become accustomed to seeing like a question mark icon and know we can either just hover or click the icon for more info. So I've actually edited another photo for the purposes of this video, but rather than walk you through how I worked on it, I actually wanted to touch on it here as I talk about what could be improved, and that has to do with black and white. Now, I'm glad that Dehancer also offers some black and white options, but I think to utilize them, there needs to be a means of controlling the color. Now, as an example of what I mean, here is the final image. Now, this is a Nande parakeet I photographed last month while I was in Florida. I specifically chose this image based on the colors to demonstrate a feature that I really think needs to be added into the plugin. Now, I started off by following Dehancer's recommendations. I chose Ilford HP5 as my film stock, and after working on it for a few minutes, this is what I came up with, and it's all right. Now, I tried again, but instead of using Dehancer's suggestions, I edited the photo as I typically would. Ran it through Dehancer and, well, basically wound up with almost the same image. So what's the problem? Well, there's no way of controlling color. See, typically when shooting in black and white, you use color filters as a primary means of doing this. So for example, a landscape photographer would often use a yellow filter to help bring out the yellows and greens of the leaves, as well as darken a blue sky. Now, Lightroom and Photoshop have ways of working with colors when working in black and white, and plugins like NYX Silver Effect Pro actually have the ability to add a digital version of the color filter. The end result is more what I have in mind when converting to black and white. Also, for the sake of trying to at least add some grain, I ran this image through Dehancer and it still just didn't work as I was hoping. I'm guessing the film profiles are designed to work a certain way with each color, so when trying to use the plugin on an already black and white image, it doesn't seem like it knows what to do. So yeah, adding a way of controlling color would be a great addition for those who like working in black and white. So who's this for? I think this plugin is a solid pick for digital photographers curious about film but hesitant about the costs associated with it. Is it going to replicate film perfectly? No, of course not. But for most viewers, I think it's impressively close. Sure, you can pixel peep and really scrutinize each image, but it's only you that's doing it, not your viewers. Now, I'm sure there's already someone writing in the comments that the results I showed didn't truly look like Velvia 50 or Ectar 25. It's possible, and you have a point. But I still feel Dehancer offers a meaning of creating a film-like aesthetic quite effectively. Now, as for the cost, that's all relative, and only you can decide if it's worth it. Again though, when you consider the continuous cost of film and processing, it doesn't take long to see how Dehancer is the less expensive option. Now, before we end the video, I do also want to mention that Dehancer also has an app for both iPhone and iPad. They're just as powerful, offering the same options, and works perfectly with your iPhone photos. In fact, there are a couple of features I've noticed in the mobile apps that I'd love to see added to the other versions. Now, as I mentioned earlier, clipping warnings would be a great addition, and interestingly, the app already has this. Likewise, I also love when selecting grain in the mobile app, you can select the grain by film size and by speed. Please add this to the normal plugin. That said, please note the iPhone and iPad versions are subscription only. Also, for those who work in video, Dehancer also has some plugins for DaVinci Resolve, Final Cut Pro, Adobe Premiere, and After Effects. A big thank you to Dehancer for sending this over my way. If you like what you saw and you want to give it a try, head over to Dehancer.com for a free trial. And if you decide to purchase, use promo code Snyder to save 10% off any of their products. So now it's your turn. Which do you prefer? Do you prefer that timeless quality of film photography or the modern look of digital? Drop your preference in the comments below. And if this video was useful to you and you're interested in more photography tips, tricks, and gear reviews, please consider subscribing. It shows me how much I'm helping viewers like you, and I truly appreciate it. Now, if you're not ready to subscribe just yet, but liked what you saw, a quick like on the video would also mean a lot. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you next time.